twice as long as I have been, and has probably been to twice as many as I have. He used to work for an architecture firm in Sydney and now is off on his own. Been doing that and got his first commission as an individual in Chicago a couple years ago from somebody in Sydney while he was in Chicago. So it's a small world. Tim says for the right price he'll fly to anywhere and come help you figure this out or how to model your cat in Revit. So, and we're also being recorded, so say what you will and be blackmailed for it later. So without further ado, Tim.
Thank you, Nicholas. Can everyone at the back hear me okay? Mic working? No? Not working? I can't control. Oh, yeah, okay. Is that better? Is that working? Testing, testing. It is on there. I'll just have to talk a little more loudly.
See if I can get somebody.
So, okay. Thank you for the introduction, and great to see so many people here. Now, I'm not going to spend any time on talking about myself or what I've been doing. I'm just going to launch straight into the presentation, and I'm going to kill that, which was just for your entertainment while you're waiting. If we have time, that's what I'll be showing at the end of the presentation. It's going to be a little hard to see how we go because it depends on, firstly, whether my live demo actually goes according to plan or not, and also to what kind of reaction responses I get. So this is going to be a brand new topic for me, but for everyone else, I think, because it's a new feature in Revit. So before I start talking about it, global parameters was a new feature introduced in 2016 release 2, and then it was enhanced considerably in 2017. So how many people have had a play around with global parameters so far? Okay, a lot or a little? Anyone actually using it in production on anything? 2, 3? Okay. So I'm not using it in production either, because the company that I'm currently doing most of my work with is still on 2016, and for some reason they haven't been able to install R2 yet. So this is all theoretical work, but hopefully you will all figure out useful things that you will be able to do with global parameters when you get back. So I'm not going to read through the topics that I'm going to cover, but I will be doing lots of live demos. So we will get into that as soon as I can. I have to do a little bit of an introduction just so that people know what's going on. That's the list of the demos that I'm hoping to cover. So the first thing we need to think about is understanding Revit parameters themselves. And I had a discussion with Brian Mackey about covering this topic in the presentation, because he's doing a presentation on global parameters, I think at the next RTC. Anyway, he said, no, don't spend time on that. If people don't know how parameters work in Revit and the subtleties of them, then they should go out and figure it out. So I'm just going to really skim through this, but it is really important, even if you don't intend to use global parameters, it's really important that you understand all the subtleties and strange quirks of different kinds of parameters in Revit. And they're all listed there, and I'll kind of go through some of those as we go through, but you really need to know what shared parameters are. You need to know what reporting parameters are in order to understand what I'm talking about, and project parameters as well. But we will go through those. Now, what I did was, I thought, well, because parameters are so complicated in Revit, how about I do a matrix or two to try and track how different kinds of parameters work in different situations. And this is in the handout. It's also on my blog, Revit Cat, so you can look that up anytime you like, and it'll be there for public consumption. And I'm not going to go through it now because it's way too complicated to explain every little thing. But the gist of it is that shared parameters are not available in every situation with other kinds of parameters. And they are really important for scheduling and tagging, essential for tagging. And global parameters are not available in every situation. And all the different system parameters, whether they're built-in or ones that you've created using project parameters, or ones that have come from families, all work in different ways. So, global parameters themselves, I'm assuming that everyone has some idea what they are, but I'll just do a quick explanation. Keep out of the bright lights there. They are not global. It's the first thing you need to know about them. They exist in your project and only in the project you create them in. Shared parameters, on the other hand, are kind of global. Well, they're not global. They're company-wide, most likely. If you're really lucky, they might be global. Someone else might be using the same shared parameters. Global parameters are really another kind of project parameter, but they're different from the current project parameters that we have available to us. The traditional project parameters, when you create them, you assign them to a category, and they will then be available for all elements in that category. Global parameters exist outside of that sphere, and they work somewhat like parameters within the family editor. So they kind of exist in isolation, and then you can link them to individual elements. And they can do all kinds of amazing stuff. There are a couple of ways of linking them to the elements, and I'll show you those. You cannot use shared parameters with global parameters, which means you can't schedule or tag them, but you kind of can't do that anyway because they're not linked to an element directly. And there are, well, in the help files it says there are two kinds of shared parameters. I like to separate them as three. So there's reporting parameters where they go out and grab information from your model. And then there are driving parameters which push information or data from the global parameters into the model. But then there are a whole lot of intermediate ones which do all your calculations, and I kind of like to keep those separate for a number of reasons that we will go through. So how do they work? Well, I will give a live demo in a minute, but there are two methods. The first is associate to a property. Operates the same as it does in Family Editor. So you get that little button there. Then when you, this is when you've selected an element in the project, you get that button sometimes, not always. You click on that button, it says, okay, you want to associate that property to a global parameter. And if you've got a list, there, you've got a whole lot already existing, you can select one. Most likely you will need to create a new one. And the icons are different in 2016 and 17. You will see that. So in 2017 they're getting rid of more and more text-based icons. And in the global parameter dialog box there's even another icon which looks really blurry in this screen. I know this corner of the screen is not very clear. Hopefully you can read it all. So if you have to create a global parameter, it's very similar to the family editor, but one really important difference. There is no instance or type radio buttons there for you to choose. Because they exist in isolation, you then have to link them yourself. There are the usual disciplines and types. Really important you get the types correct, otherwise you won't be able to link them properly. No need to dwell on that. grouping is only available in 2017, not in 2016. The tooltip is available in both versions, and it's really, really important that you use that, because unlike the family editor where you've got a small contained element that may have a few parameters, maybe quite a lot, they kind of exist in isolation. Not many people have to look at those, but global parameters, you can have hundreds of them. And if you don't create a tooltip to describe what they are, nobody will know what the hell all these parameters are, and you won't know what they are in a week, 2 weeks, depends how good your memory is. And they also pop up as descriptions in the project once they've been associated, so that's really useful. Okay, so first demo I'm going to do is show you how to associate the global parameter directly into an element. So, when I pick, I'm just going to pick an element. Okay, I'll select rather a ceiling, and you will see, mouse is pretty clear, you will see a little icon there. Now that was not available, not visible prior to 2016 R2, so that whole column there didn't exist before. And one of the things I have found in my messing around with this is that that new column there is quite likely to confuse the hell out of most of your users, because they won't be accustomed to it. And they will be going across to, if you had material, for example, and then there's normally a little hidden icon on the right-hand side, they're going to keep clicking on this global parameter dialog box by mistake. So we want to watch out for that. Anyway, this is a system family, which means you don't have a lot of control over it, but it has one little icon there for the height offset from the floor. And this is currently, somebody has keyed in a value there. This has come from a live project. So when I click on that, it comes up with a list of global parameters that I've created. So that one is probably bathroom, so I should link it to that. Once it's done, this value is now grayed out, and you can see that it's actually changed the value there. It was 2400. Now I apologize, everything here is in metric. The whole of this presentation was me exploring new stuff, and I just didn't have time to figure out how to convert it to feet and inches and then try and do a demo in something I'm not very familiar with. So that's a challenge for you lot. You'll have to just cope with metric. The rest of the world does, so and I can see one Australian here, and hopefully there's a few Canadians, so you'll be all right. Okay, so I probably need to speed up. Here's another. Please turn your phones off or put them on silent. Okay, here's another one that is not associated. I'll just click on that, and let's suppose there was no parameter there that I needed. Click on a new one, create new, and I'm just going to put test so you can see. And you would feel something more meaningful in there, but I don't want to waste time on this. And you'd probably change that to something other than, dimensions might be okay. Okay, so now when I hover over there, in this situation the tooltip does not show up. It only shows up when you've associated it to a dimension. Okay, so let's go back to our kitchen here. This bathroom one. I've got some tags on there with the ceiling heights. So if I now go into Manage and Global Parameters, new icon here with a little picture of the world. This is my list of global parameters. You're going to see a lot more complicated, a lot longer lists in a few minutes. This is really simple, this one, this demo. So there's my list of parameters in there, and let's change that to 1800, which is, oh, I meant to put 1800, which is near enough 6 foot. So it changes, and it changes the tag there. So you imagine that all of the ceilings on this floor of that particular type could be changed in 2 mouse clicks. So if I click on that one there, which is the bathroom ceiling, right click, select all instances in view. So all of those selected ones are bathroom ceilings, providing whoever built this model did it properly. There's a little question mark there because some of them have been associated and most of them have not. So I'm going to associate all of them. And now all of my bathroom ceilings have changed height. And then I'm using a keyboard shortcut, GP for global parameters. That's not the one in the system, it's one I. So somebody comes in and says, hey, you can't have 6'6" ceilings in your bathroom. Change it back to 2400, which is 8 foot. All of them have changed. So how quick was that? So to me, that is a fantastic tool to be able to set that up and manage it really quickly. Unfortunately, when you select a floor slab, that capability is not available. So with system families, the built-in parameters, which offset from floor, for example, very, very few of them have been set up in 2016, R2. They've added some more in 2017. For example, the base and top of a wall or a column, both of which is extremely useful. So you could have, I don't know how many people have walls that go up to the underside of floor slabs, and there are a few different ways of handling that. You can attach the walls to the underside of the slabs, which I think is a really bad way of working because it causes all kinds of problems. Some people set the top of the wall to the next level above, and then minus 1 foot if that's your floor thickness. Some people just have an offset value from the same level as the base of it. Again, if you do that, then you have to go in and select every single wall and change it when the floor slab thickness changes. So using this method, you could just change all of your the tops of all of your walls with a couple of mouse clicks, which is great. Okay, so let's, one vital thing I forgot to show you. One of the things that they have enabled in 2017, not in 16, is that you can schedule properties by association to global parameters. And I've docked my properties and project browser in there, which I never normally do, but on a small screen. Okay, so let's go to a seating schedule, or schedule for the Americans. So there's all my seatings in there. They have given us a new capability. So if I choose filter, height offset from level is associated with and then in this case it's defaulted to bathrooms. So now it's picked only the ceilings that have their height property associated to that global parameter. So that's a great tool to be able to track what has or hasn't been. If I do that for something else where there's very few that are associated, you can see that. There's only one being associated. I didn't do the whole model. They've also, one of the problems with this is that if you associate with two different parameters, you get nothing, because you can't associate to more than one global parameter. So to me, that's not particularly useful. Let's set that to none. What's actually more useful is to say not associated with, and then you could have a whole bunch not associated with. So you could list all of the parameters that you've set up relating to ceilings. So none of these are associated to those, which is probably more useful, because then you can go in and select all the ones that haven't been properly associated. So it's a bit clunky. What's actually much more useful is to be able to do a view filter. So view visibility, and you could filter by actual height, but I'm going to filter by I'm going to filter by associated with, and I'd better make it a pattern. See how that works. Okay, so all the ceilings that are currently associated with a global parameter, that particular one, have changed colour. So I've set up another view that's got a whole bunch of different filters, one for each different ceiling height. Okay, let's go back to presentation. This is a list of the built-in parameters, system family built-in parameters that have been enabled to allow you to associate them. So there's not that many. They just recently added a whole lot for doors, which is kind of not especially useful, but my favourite is ramp width. Why would you? I can't imagine anyone wanting to use that for tread depth on a stair. Nah. But they still haven't done floor offset. The windows, maybe, walls is useful. Okay, so the second method is by applying to a dimension. Same as you do in the family editor. So I'm not going to go through it in detail. We'll see it in a demo in a minute. The great thing about this is that it allows you to pick two dimensions that are not adjacent. So in this little example, these might be grid dimensions. So you might have a building with an underground car park that has wide grids, narrow grids, wide grids, narrow grids, but you want them to be equal. So you can just apply global parameters to those. And it's much better to apply them in that situation, well, you have to, with separate dimension lines for each one. In 2017, they have enabled you to apply them to a multiple segment dimension, like this one. So this purple dimension here that's selected, one dimension. You can apply it to that, which means that every segment will suddenly become the same. So you can imagine that if somebody applies that to a grid layout that's alternating grids, it's going to change your entire building in 10 seconds flat, which is a really bad thing. So, yep.
Is there any way to override the dimension itself with X? Yes,
I'll show you that in a second as a demo. Good question, thanks. So anyway, I would be very careful with the multi-segment one. To be honest, I wish I had not enabled it. We'll see this in a minute, but adding a label, you select a dimension, you add a label. They've shifted, in 2017, they've shifted the label adding thing up into the ribbon. And create new. Okay, so let's go into live demo. I'm going to do the floor height because you can't do that with the other associate method. And basically what we do is use similar methods to the family editor. I'm going to do this in section. So I have a section view here. I have a reference plane. Now, this is one particular workflow. You could just attach a dimension from your level to a floor slab. Select the dimension, add your floor set down, global parameter, or create a new one. But what that means is that you have to go and add a dimension and label it for every single floor slab in the entire level or building, which is going to be a bit painful. So I'm recommending that you use a method that I use commonly in the family editor, and hopefully a lot of other people do, is you put some control reference planes in, and you put one dimension in there with the global parameter associated. And the answer to your question a minute ago was when you select dimension, once you've associated the global parameter, the little show in new label. And when that's ticked, it shows it. So the next step of this process is to align, and somebody's just changed the volume. Is that getting too loud at the back? No? Okay. I hope you didn't miss the first half of this presentation. Okay, I've already associated this. I'm going to move this down. I think he's adjusting it. I've already associated this, or aligned it and locked it, so it won't let me, but probably I can do the same over here. Align that and lock it. So what that means is you've got one controlling dimension there, and then you just align a whole bunch of things to it. So it's kind of easier to manage. So now all we need to do is keyboard shortcut for global parameters. There's my, let's make this dramatic, 300, 1 foot. And it's saying it wants to unjoin, which is fair enough. And see, both floor slabs have moved. So that's something that was really painful to do before. Okay. Now, one little warning there is that if you, I'm not going to go back into Revit, but if you have already associated that dimension and locked it, this property here is not grayed out, and if you change it in the properties dialog box, it will break the constraint, which is not surprising, but I think it would be probably better if it was grayed out so you kind of knew that something was going on. But if you do change it and you break that constraint, Revit is a little brutal in the way that it does it. My experience is that it will go and remove the, instead of removing the lock, the align, which is the thing that I've done most recently, the one I would like it to break, it actually goes and removes the association of the global parameter to the dimension. So it's kind of hard to know what it's actually done. So you've got to watch that one. It's much better when you get the dialog box that says warning, do you want to unconstrain? It's better to just back out of that and go and figure out why, and then maybe don't try and change this value. Okay, so a few things that are new in 2017. I've already alluded to some of them. One is you can associate type properties. They've enabled a few more system properties, which I've already gone through. They have also enabled the ability to associate to project parameters. That little green asterisk there means that is huge, that's major, because, we will see this a little later on, you cannot schedule a global parameter. And you've put all this amazing information in there and you want to be able to schedule and tag it, even though it's kind of may sit in isolation and is not linked to an element, you still may want to include it in your schedule. But because you can now associate project parameters, it enables you to then schedule and tag stuff that is not actually part of an element. And we'll see that in a minute. And I've already shown you filtering views and schedules, and they've added in a bunch of better management tools, which we'll go through. Some limitations. The red asterisk is bad. You cannot associate a global parameter to an array in the project, which is really frustrating because it's something you want to do as soon as you start playing with global parameters. There's a few other, one of the things I found really frustrating is you can't have a reporting parameter that is an area, so therefore you can't associate. So reporting parameters, remember, will pull information out of the model into the global parameters. So you can't pull an area out of your model to use it in a calculation, which is very frustrating. Okay, so in the dialog box, they've given us some tools. I would strongly recommend using a naming convention if you're going to have more than about 10 global parameters, because even though they have enabled grouping with the titles, you still, when you're trying to actually associate, you still get a huge long list, so you need to be able to find them quickly. And the grouping titles are a little crazy. I just did a blog post on this recently. They're all in some strange order and you can't change them. So what I've taken to doing is ignoring what the titles are that are provided, because the global parameters exist in isolation, but they've just inherited all the grouping titles that you use for families, but they're not actually relevant because they don't exist in the project directly. So I just create my own titles. This one, but just to show you that you can do all kinds of different crazy stuff with shared parameters. This is a bunch of little house files, silly little house files, they're all the same. I just linked them all in and just dumped them on the site. And then I used the same process of associating global parameters to reference dimensions on reference planes for the height of each one of these houses. So if I find one that looks like it has not been set up properly, okay, it looks like they're all set up. So I go back to properties. So I've got a different one for each house, because they're all going to be different heights because it's a sloping site. So what I've done is I've got a pad in there. I've aligned the pad to a reference plane, and then I've aligned the linked house file to the same reference plane, so they will move up and down together. So let's go back to the 3D view and go into global parameters. No, this one I did change to Imperial last minute. So let's just change. Not sure which one it is. I'll just cancel that for a second and see. That is house number 6. I think that one is one that has not actually been properly associated, so we'll just see what happens. House 6. Let's make that 53 feet. So, okay, so the house file I have linked to the reference plane, but I didn't link the pad. So let's just go back in. I can't see the pad, I don't know what it is. Sorry, I don't want to waste your time with that. For some reason I can't see the pad. Anyway, you get the idea of that. Does that make sense to everyone? Why you might want to do that? You can change the pad and the house both at the same time. I think this one is working properly. Let's drop this one down. Yeah, so that one's disappeared down into the ground. So really easy to change those rather. Now, I've also just set up a quick schedule here, and I've added a property here called pad height. So this is going to show you how we might push information back from the global parameters into the elements so that you can schedule them. So let's go back to, so we can see I've done house 1 and 2. So the first thing I will do is go into project parameters just to show you. And I have created a parameter which should be associated to tricky one here, I think. Yeah, it's hidden in there. So I've associated this parameter to pads, and it's just a length parameter. So that every pad in here has that parameter, and then all I need to do is add sure which one that is, I think it's 6. So this is a manual process. For each pad I've got to associate it. Oh, that was already associated. You can see the little equal symbol there. That was already associated. That's 3. Notice that I haven't used any numbers in my global parameters. It's just a habit I've got into. Make sure I don't get any conflicts with the calculations. Go back to my schedule. So now those values are showing up in there. You cannot schedule a pad height normally. There is no capability to do that. So that's how you can link global parameter information back into your model and then schedule it and tag it. So that's why I was saying that was a big deal. Okay. Let's close that. very good question. It works the same way as the equals parameter constraint. When you delete it, it asks you if you want to keep the constraint. And if you say yes, then that's fine, it remains there. One thing you've got to watch out for is that if you select a dimension and you edit the witness line and you drag it and attach it to something else, it does not ask you if you want to remove the constraint, which to me is really bad, and I've had arguments with Autodesk developers about this. That's how the equals one works anyway, and it's wrong. So you just don't do that, basically. Okay, so let's start doing some slightly more interesting stuff. So we go to a pretty little, boring little house. Well, it's not a house, it's like an assembly hall or something. I've got a bunch of windows along here, which 3 of them kind of are the same, and these last 2 are different. What I've done is I've associated a bunch of parameters here, so window height, front. This is where the naming convention comes in. So this change the height, width, window front, window width, front. I should have probably picked the other one as well. And got a lower pane here, a transom, which you don't call transoms here, I forget what it's called, a horizontal mullion. Okay, so I don't have a parameter in here, so I'm just going to create one. I'm going to break my cardinal rule, and I'm not going to do a tooltip because we're wasting time in the demo. So now I can go into global parameters and window transom height. Now I have window height front parameter here. I'm doing a Control-C to copy that. And I'm going to put a formula in here. Control-V, paste, divide by 3. So now, that one, the transom is 1/3 of the height there. Now you could argue that you could do that within the family editor, but I want this one to be potentially different on, I think I associated it to the wrong property there, so I'll just associate that. And that one means it's width and height associated. Okay, so now we've got 5 windows there, all have instance-based properties, and they're all the same. Now those are all going to be controlled by some stuff that I've done in Plan, and this is where we're starting to get towards computational design a little bit. Sorry, yeah? You can't use arrays. Groups can be a problem. You have to be very careful with that. I didn't have time to really investigate groups. It does work within groups, but you could run into trouble. So I'd do some serious testing with that. And arrays we'll come to in a minute. But what I've got here is I have a parameter here, global parameter, a driving parameter. So that means I can go in and change the value for the distance between those 2 grids. And then I have a reporting parameter for the internal width of this room. And I could have done a calculation from the grid dimensions, but then I want this to just flex when the wall thicknesses change. So it's easier to do a reporting parameter. It also has the benefit of allowing me to put equals constraints for the center lines of each of these windows without, there's a bug in there that you could encounter. So when I change the, I'll go back to the 3D view. When I change that driving parameter for the room width, the windows should change as well. So I'm going to go to global parameters, put that over on the left. Sorry, I keep forgetting the right-hand side of the screen is pretty blurred. So here's my driving parameter. I think it was v12. So if I make that we should make it 8 meters, apply. So my whole building shrinks because the grid dimension has shrunk. The windows all have formulas in there that control the width, dependent on what pier width I have, and the overall width. So I also can change that pier width and make that 900. And it's broken it. So I was pushing it too far. 450, which is 1.6, I think. So you can see the piers just increase a little bit, all the windows. So there's a whole bunch of formulas in there, which are all in the handout. I'm not going to go through it now because we won't have time. These windows on the side I've done as type parameters, so I should just go into. So in 2017, they enabled you to associate global parameters to type properties. Can't do it in 2016. So here we go, we've got the height and the width associated with that. We might associate the transom height as well, so that they will line up. Now what that's done is it will have affected those 4 windows, but not the reddish ones because they're a different type. So I would have to go in and change. Oh, sorry, wrong button. My eye must have been drawn to that little equal sign. So this one. So the reason I'm showing you this is that, sure, you could change a whole bunch of windows by changing one type parameter, but if you want to change 6 different windows that all have the same type parameter, you would normally have to go into edit type for each of those 6 different types. But now we can do all of them with one type. Sorry, with one change using global parameters. So they're now all associated. And just show you a couple more things. I've got a height for the roof and the ceiling inside. So when I change that, it breaks it. Probably the windows are getting too skinny. I probably need to make these piers. What I'll do is I'll try making this smaller. So, if you want it to be totally robust, you've got some work to do. And obviously, this is only a demo project, so the purpose of it was to show you how it works, not to make it perfect. There's also some formulas in there that change the proportions of these piers between the windows. So if your building gets really tall, the piers will get proportionally wider by a factor of what? 1.5 or 2 or whatever you build into the formulas. Okay, so if I go back to my plan view, you will see that we should also have another dimension that I can't see at the moment, but that leads me to reveal constraints. So that's showing all of the global parameter constrained dimensions in there. It doesn't show things that have been constrained by using the associate button, only the ones by dimensions. Okay, so I think I better just get rid of that. There's one dimension in there that I can't see at the moment, just thinking it may have somehow disappeared, but I'll just keep going anyway and see what happens. The next little demo I want to show was, I said that you can't do arrays with global parameters. So the only trick that I figured out is to build the arrays into a family. So I've got a family here that is a row of toilet cubicles, and it has an array number there. And if I associate that to a calculation, it is not working. Okay. What I'm going to do is close straight out of that file, open the next one, because I must have broken something in that file. Let's test it now. I think it was to do with that missing dimension. So let's try associating this one. Okay, so that's filled in the full width there. So what I've got here is a calculation that is taking this dimension here, shown view, reporting width, and this one here is reporting length, and it is doing a calculation of an area. Because I can't get an area directly out, I've had to do my own calculation, which is fine for a rectangular room. If you've got a funny shaped room, this is going to get a lot more complicated. But if I do my area calculations here, so my area calculation is just reporting room length, reporting room width, and then it is taking another value that I have up here and saying for every 30 square meters or 300 square feet or whatever it is of space that I have in this hall, I need to provide one toilet cubicle. So it's taking that value and it's dividing my calculated area by that 30 square meters to give me a number. So I'm getting 5 there. And then I've put another little check calculation in here that says don't let it go below 2. Partly because the array won't work less than 2, but also because you're pretty unlikely to want to actually build a room that's got less than 2 cubicles in it. So as soon as we change one of the dimensions for the size of the rooms, it should. It worked. Excellent. It worked every time in testing, except for just now in the previous. So it's just gone, recalculated the area of that big hall, and said, okay, you need to provide more toilets. So it's made, going in, and there's driving parameters here that take that calculation and make the rooms bigger, and then it pushes the number of toilets that you require back into the family that has the array built into it. So that's the only way that I figured out how to make an array. So does that answer your question about arrays? Okay, cool. Oh, I did cancel, so it's just, that's something to note. If you cancel out of the global parameters, even though you've hit apply, it backs out. Doesn't matter for this. I've already shown you schedules, but I'll just show you again. I probably should close out this one. Open the next demo. So what I've got here is a schedule where I have, I'll just expand it it first. I've just get it to schedule the, this is a multi-category one, but it's just scheduling generic components, which is what I've chosen to use. So it's just counting up how many you need. Well, you can do a schedule of how many there are in there. But what you can't do in normal schedule is to push that calculated area back into your schedule and get it in the same schedule, which also then has the number required. So here we should say and this one is supplied. I won't bother to fill in the rest, but you get the gist of that. So that's something that was really hard to do previously, but this is very easy to do because what it's doing is taking the area from the room, from the global parameter, and adding it to the room, which I'll do in a second. So I will add. Now, the numbers don't quite stack up here because I didn't have time to just fix it up perfectly. I'll show you one that is set up properly. So what I can do is create a new parameter. So this is now creating a project parameter. I think there's already one in there called area per WC, so I'm going to put in toilet. It needs to be an area. It's going to be an instance. Don't worry about that. And I need to add this to well, I can't do it here. I think I can do it to generic. Oh yes, that's going to work. So we need to go back to plan. Now, I can't remember what I think I need to. Sorry, I did need to add it to a room, not to the toilets there. Because I was in a schedule, it wouldn't let me add it to a room. I would have had to go into project parameters from here to do it. Add a new one. Rooms were not showing up there because it was a multi-category schedule. So I'll have to add it from here. Actually, time-wise, I'm actually going to bail out of that, because hopefully you get the gist of it, and show you one where it's already set up. No, I didn't save it, sorry. Does anyone want to actually see that? I've got some more interesting stuff to come. It is in the handouts how to do that. Okay, we'll move on. What I'm going to do is actually dive straight into the next demo and then come back to the presentation when we see how much time we've got, because otherwise you might miss out on the good stuff. Okay, so as soon as we've got that set up, we've got the building that you saw a few minutes ago on the left, and on the right we have a drafting view. And each one of these sliders, this is all done with no Dynamo. I forgot to mention to anyone at the beginning, that's the only time I'm mentioning that particular product. Fabulous as it is, it's not for everyone, but this is potentially for anyone in Revit. So I've just created a detail component, and all it is a bunch of field regions, no big deal, just looks like a slider. And it's got some reference planes that have dimensions attached to them. So when you select them, you get the little shape handles. And when you drag the shape handle, the little circle shaded region goes with it. So it just looks like a slider. I actually demonstrated this 2 years ago at RTC, they introduced global parameters with Autodesk did 3, maybe even 4 years ago in one of the beta versions, and all the people doing beta testing got really excited, and I did a whole presentation, submitted it, got it approved, all based on that, and then Autodesk pulled it before it got released. So after that, I figured out how to get these slider things working using adaptive components, and I showed that 2 years ago, but it was really tricky and complicated, so I doubt whether anyone actually used it. As soon as they put global parameters back in, then it really worked, and it's so easy to use. So the reason they pulled it is that they didn't have reveal constraints, they didn't have a whole bunch of tools that we now have for managing constraints and global parameters. You couldn't sort them alphabetically and all those things that they've since put into the software. So to get this working, all I need to do is add 2 reporting parameters for each slider. No, actually only one here, which is the overall height of this slider, and I've made it a meter. You can make it a foot or whatever you want it to be. And then you have one more reporting parameter that is attached to where this slider circle is. And this one currently is, okay, so I keep forgetting where to go for associating. No, it's not associated to anything, so we'll come back to that in a minute. But these 3 are already set up. So if I go back to my tile view, which has very annoyingly disappeared. Okay, it's decided to swap sides. Who knows why? Don't particularly care. Okay, so when I grab this, and that one is the height. I'm just going to drop that down a little bit, and it drops the building down. Change the width, push it up a little bit. Change the depth. And all those windows are all adjusting as per all those formulas that I showed a couple of minutes ago. So that is computational design, super simplified, in totally 100% within Revit in 2017. Anybody can go out and do that. I have put some data sets up. I can't remember if the slider is in. I'm pretty sure the slider is in there, but if it's not, then anybody feel free to contact me, and I can send it to you. But it's not particularly complicated, and the handouts describe how to, more or less how to create it. So let's just change one more little thing in this. We've got a few minutes left. So, okay, on this one, I've made something a little bit different from what I did before. I've got the transom height at varying different heights, so each one of these is associated to a different parameter, global parameter. I've got 4 different global parameters in there for that. So let's associate the transom height to one of these sliders so that you can adjust it there. You'll see the process, how easy it is to set up. So I've got a minimum and a maximum Now with this one, the proportions, sorry, I forgot to explain. With the sliders, you're basically moving something up and it's adjusting a length parameter. But I wanted to make that slider work for a length, a number, an integer, an area, an angle, whatever. So I've got formulas in there that convert the length, which is the reporting parameter of the height of the slider, convert that to a proportion of the overall height as a pure number, and then you can feed that into any different calculation. You then have to convert it back into the same units that it was originally for each one. So I'm just going to check where my transom height is at the moment. Okay, so here's my formula for the height of the transom, and I've made it 1. That hopefully you can. It's in the actually this little bit is not in the handout because I didn't do this bit for the handout, but it's just converting the maximum height of the slider with the actual height. It's just a proportion. And then at some point I need to convert that back to a... normally I would need to convert it back to a length or an angle or whatever, but I'm going to use a formula here. I should have used... should have copied and pasted this one. So the proportion. Okay, so I've made a typo there. I deliberately just use the colour of the slider in the name there because it's actually much easier to keep track of. If you've got it saying that it's transom height or something, it gets harder to work out which one is linked to which. So hopefully that should I don't know if you saw when as soon as I closed that, they changed, but hopefully click on the slider now and drop this down. And the transom heights drop. So there you go. That was pretty easy, wasn't it? Much easier than learning that wonderful add-in program that's been around for a couple of years. And, uh-oh, it didn't like something. Okay. And I'm out of time to troubleshoot that one. So, saved by the bell. Any questions? There is a whole lot more stuff that, sort of technically stuff, that is in the handout and on the slides for the presentation. So what I will do is, while somebody may or may not be asking me a question, I'm just going to open another file. It's got a whole bunch more. Yeah, please.
Can Dynamo see global parametrics?
That's something I have not checked yet.
Can you repeat the question? Can Dynamo see?
Yes, can Dynamo work with global parameters? Is there anyone from Autodesk in the room that could answer that? I have not actually tested it. I can't imagine that it wouldn't. Why would they give us such a wonderful new feature and not enable something else wonderful to work together? Why would they even think of doing that? So my guess is that yes, it would work. I can't see why it wouldn't. I mean, then there's nothing mutually exclusive about them. So this one is actually a lot simpler than what I've shown you, but it looks more like computational design that people normally think about, where it's representing a whole building. So just saw the video at the beginning. Actually, the thing that I'm interested in is the radius. Because as you bump the radius up, that is not breaking, and when I change the angle, it's twisting the whole building, and the radius on here is not breaking. And that's something pretty amazing, because prior to 2017, for sure, it would have all skewed and it would have no longer remained as a tangent. So what I'm going to do is go into a plan view and edit that extrusion and show you something else new and wonderful in Revit 2017. And if you can see them there, little tangency locks. So that means that this radius here will remain perfect tangent to those two angle lines. If anyone has tried to maintain that in previous versions of Revit with angled lines, it's usually okay with orthogonal. Anything at an angle, it just goes off skew and you get this bump. Instead of a nice tangent, it goes like that or that. So you can use that to fix up some, yeah?
Related to what you were just talking about, I guess, what's the nature of over-constraining the model with using local parameters?
What's the what?
Danger of over-constraining the model.
Oh yes, sorry, I didn't have time to go through that. Well, it's a global rule in Revit. You don't over-constrain using your model using locks and equals constraints, because it just gets bogged down, and if you put too many equals constraints and locks and padlocks all over the place, you just can't work with it. The other reason is that with global parameters, you saw that it broke a few times. If you don't go in and put in some really robust checking formulas in there, it's going to start breaking. And if you say to people, wow, we've got this fabulous new tool, go out and use it, you're going to end up with anarchy very quickly. You need to really keep a lid on how many people use it, and they need to know what they're doing. But you can see from that even those really simple examples, it's pretty powerful. But even if you just use it to control the height of your ceilings, it's paid for itself in 5 minutes flat. It doesn't need to do anything else, and I think it's a wonderful tool. So thank you for that. Please feel free to come and ask me more questions and fill out the survey.